Have you ever heard of William Congreve? He was the absolute master of a style of play called the comedy of manners. Now, his work is over 300 years old, full of these elaborate plots with scheming lovers and scandalous secrets. But what can these dramas, with all their powdered wigs, actually teach us about the social games we all play today? Well, let's dive in and find out.
All right, so here's what we've got lined up. First, we're going to meet the king of comedy himself. Then we'll check out the early triumphs that really put him on the map. After that, we'll spend some serious time with his masterpiece, The Way of the World. Then we'll peek at what he wrote beyond just comedies. And finally, we'll talk about why he still matters today.
Okay, let's jump in our time machine. We're heading back to late 17th century England, a time they called the Restoration. And in this world of high society and even sharper tongues, a playwright and poet named William Congreve becomes the talk of the town.
So Congreve's specialty was something called the comedy of manners. You could think of it as a super sophisticated roast of the rich and powerful. His plays were all about poking fun at the crazy social games of the aristocracy, right? A world where love was a strategy, marriage was basically a business deal, and your greatest weapon was a sharp comeback. And audiences absolutely loved it because it was this hilarious, high-stakes mirror of their own lives.
Now, Congreve didn't just ease his way into the London theater scene. No, he burst onto it with a string of instant hits. And with each play, he just kept refining that signature style of brilliant, sparkling dialogue that made him a star.
His very first play, The Old Bachelor, was a massive success right out of the gate. It's about this guy, Hartwell, a total cynic who thinks he's way too smart to be charmed by women. So of course, what happens? He falls hard for a woman named Sylvia, having no idea she's a prostitute. It's this hilarious web of deception where the guy who thinks he knows it all gets completely played. A classic takedown of male pride.
His next play, The Double Dealer, took things in a much darker, more cynical direction. The villain here is a character named Maskwell, and he's the perfect example of that treacherous frenemy. He acts like he's helping his best friend Mellifont get married, but behind the scenes, he's scheming to ruin him and steal his fiancée. It's actually a pretty chilling look at the kind of betrayal that hides behind a friendly smile.
And then came Love for Love, which masterfully mixes total financial panic with romantic comedy. Our hero, Valentine, has spent way too much money and he's drowning in debt. His father makes him an offer. I'll pay off everything, but you have to sign away your inheritance. So now Valentine has to choose between his love for the wealthy Angelica and his own financial survival. It's a brilliant satire of a world where money really does call all the shots, even in matters of the heart.
So after these massive successes, Congreve drops what everyone agrees is his masterpiece, the absolute peak of Restoration comedy, The Way of the World. Seriously, this is the one where all his incredible talents just come together in one brilliant, super intricate play.
Let's meet the cast, shall we? First, we've got Mirabell. He's our hero. Clever, charming, but, also a little manipulative. He's in love with Millamant, our heroine, who is unbelievably witty and values our independence more than anything. The biggest problem? Her aunt, the very vain Lady Wishfort, holds the purse strings to a huge chunk of Millamant's inheritance. And of course, you've got to have villains. Enter Faynal and Mrs. Marwood, a pair of scheming adulterers.
Okay, so Mirabell's plan to win Millamant is wonderfully complicated. Stay with me here. Step 1, he gets his servant to marry Lady Wishfort's servant. Step 2, he has his servant disguise himself as a fake nobleman, Sir Roland, to woo the title-obsessed Lady Wishfort. Step 3, he tricks her into a marriage contract. And the final move, he'll expose his own trick, blackmailing Lady Wishfort with public humiliation so she'll finally let him marry Millamant. It's like a social heist. The sheer complexity of it shows how restrictive their world was. You practically had to be a criminal mastermind to marry for love.
But what's really amazing about this play is a famous part called the proviso scene. This is where Mirabell and Millamant actually negotiate the terms of their marriage. And this is not about sweet romantic promises. Oh no, it's a witty, almost legalistic contract. They literally lay out the conditions for their life together, treating marriage less like a fairy tale fantasy and more like a partnership between two incredibly sharp, independent equals.
And this one line from Millamant just sums her up perfectly. She says, "One's cruelty is one's power, and when one parts with one's cruelty, one parts with one's power." Now for her, cruelty doesn't mean being mean. It's about keeping her independence, her wit, her right to say no. In a world that's trying to limit her, that cruelty is the very source of her power.
So in the end, everything comes to a head. The villains make their move, but Mirabell, who's always one step ahead, completely outmaneuvers them.
He exposes their plot, saves Lady Wishfort from financial ruin and public shame, and finally gets her blessing to marry Millamant, securing both the girl and her full inheritance. It's the perfect ending. True wit wins out over simple greed.
But here's the thing. Congreve wasn't just a one-trick pony. He wasn't only a master of comedy. The man had a much wider literary range, which just goes to show you how talented he really was. Yeah, while the comedies made him famous, Congreve proved he had some serious dramatic chops in other genres too. For instance, he wrote a hugely popular tragedy called The Mourning Bride, which is this dark story of love and revenge. He also wrote poetry like the Epistle to Lord Halifax, where he gets all reflective about art and friendship. He even wrote a novel, Incognita. The guy could really do it all.
So after a pretty short but incredibly explosive career as a playwright, what's the verdict? What is Congreve's lasting legacy? I mean, why are we still studying and performing his plays 300 years later? Well, to wrap it all up, Congreve is pretty much considered the best of the best from his era. His dialogue is just famous for its sophisticated, sparkling wit. He was an absolute master of social satire, expertly exposing all the hypocrisies of the upper class, their vanity, their greed, that huge gap between how they acted in public and what they did in private. And maybe most importantly, he created these complex, intelligent, and truly unforgettable characters, especially heroines like Millamant.
And that kind of brings us to a final thought. Congreve wrote about a world that was obsessed with reputation, with appearances, with public perception, a world where your wit was both a weapon and a shield. So in our age of social media and carefully curated online lives, you really have to ask yourself, isn't Congreve's insight into the way of the world more relevant now than it's ever been?